Have you ever felt that? You know, that burst of morning energy. You're ready to tackle everything.
Yeah, totally charged up.
Only to find maybe a few hours in
Yeah.
that your focus has completely, well, dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
Your mind starts jumping. Like from one random thought to another, you're suddenly obsessing over some minor detail.
Replaying that awkward moment from yesterday.
Exactly. And that initial drive just vanishes. It gets replaced by this cloudy mix of self-doubt and, you know, distraction.
It's such a universal thing, isn't it? That sensation that your own mind has become this restless, noisy entity, almost actively working against what you want to do.
Right. It just throws up anxieties, gets fixated on totally insignificant stuff, and seems determined to pull you away from whatever you're actually trying to focus on.
And it really can feel like our brains are just, well, wired this way sometimes.
Yeah. Like they have this constant need for stimulation.
Always seeking something.
And those negative thoughts, they seem to have this incredible sticking power compared to the calmer ones.
They really grab our attention, don't they? And they just won't let go.
Exactly.
But the crucial thing here, and this comes through really strongly in the sources you shared, is that this isn't, an unchangeable reality.
Okay.
There are definitely ways to regain some control, to quiet that internal noise, and to really put a stop to that relentless overthinking.
And that's where this idea comes in. Sense-oriented mindfulness.
Precisely. Sense-oriented mindfulness, it's basically the practice of intentionally focusing your attention on your senses. What you actually see, hear, touch, taste, smell,
Okay.
as a way to kind of anchor yourself in the present moment and quiet down that constant chatter in your head.
Okay, let's really dig into this.
Yeah.
Because our mission with this deep dive is exactly that, right? To figure out how to stop our minds from spiraling when it's just not helpful.
Yeah.
And to cultivate a sense of calm, clarity, and, well, a more mindful way of being. And in your notes, you pointed to this really interesting concept from Buddhist thought, the three poisons: desire, anger, and ignorance. Apparently, these are seen as major underlying drivers of this overthinking, leading to all sorts of problems like stress and just feeling disconnected.
And what's fascinating, and what your sources really illustrate beautifully, is how these seemingly abstract concepts show up in our very real everyday mental clutter.
Right.
Let's take desire, for example. One of the articles uses this simple act of receiving a compliment.
Okay.
You get that brief positive feeling, right? And then boom, suddenly your mind is craving more, even if the compliment itself wasn't, earth-shattering.
I see.
The insight here is that this inherent desire for more keeps us kind of trapped, looking towards the future, unable to really appreciate the now. And that directly feeds our anxious overthinking.
Oh, I totally recognize that. It's like that fleeting moment of feeling good isn't enough. There's this underlying need for constant validation.
Exactly.
And it totally distracts you from just enjoying the initial positive feeling. You're already chasing the next one.
It creates this restlessness, this feeling of never quite being satisfied.
That reminds me of something in one of your articles about the hedonic treadmill, that constant chasing of pleasure that never really satisfies.
Precisely. It ties directly into this. It keeps us perpetually oriented towards what's next, towards what we don't have,
Right.
preventing us from fully appreciating the present moment.
Okay. And then there's anger.
Then there's anger, which in this context is framed as our reactive resistance to unpleasant experiences.
Okay, so not just like full-blown rage.
No, it's broader than that. It encompasses things like jealousy, regret, even self-doubt. The key takeaway here is that our resistance to the unpleasant creates a kind of mental feedback loop, constantly replaying negativity, draining our focus on the present.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like when someone makes a snarky comment, and even if it's a small thing, your mind just grabs onto it and won't let go.
Yeah.
You replay it, you think of all the things you could have said.
Just doing it.
Yeah, you stew in the discomfort. It's like your brain just loves to dwell on the negative sometimes.
It does. And the source material mentions how even self-doubt can be a form of this resistance, that inner critic constantly picking apart your actions.
Could you elaborate on that connection? Because self-doubt seems less immediately obvious than, say, outright rage.
That's a really insightful question. Think of self-doubt as a resistance to the feeling of inadequacy, maybe, or the possibility of failure.
Okay.
Your mind fixates on past mistakes or potential shortcomings, right? Creating this cycle of negative self-talk. It's a form of mental friction, a resistance to accepting yourself or your current situation.
I see.
And just like outward anger, it consumes mental energy and prevents you from being present.
Got it. And the third one, ignorance.
And finally, we have ignorance, which in this context is described more as a lack of awareness about how our own thoughts actually operate.
Okay, so not about being unintelligent.
Not at all. The crucial insight is our lack of awareness of our own thought patterns leads to this kind of automatic detachment, missed experiences, which then fuels the overthinking cycle.
This one's really interesting. The source material uses the example of a conversation.
Yeah.
You might hear the first few words someone says, but then your mind just takes off.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're wondering what they think of you, or you're replaying a past interaction.
Mm-hmm. You're checked out mentally.
Exactly. You're physically present, but mentally you're miles away.
It's a fascinating way to frame it. So it's more about being unaware of the constant internal commentary.
Precisely. It's about the automaticity of our thought processes. We get so entangled in our internal narratives, these assumptions and judgments,
Right.
that we fail to truly see and hear what's happening right now in the present.
And that detachment becomes a habit.
It does.
Yeah.
We're so caught up in our internal stuff that we miss out on truly connecting with others, experiencing the richness of the present moment. We're almost living in a parallel mental universe.
Wow. So these three, desire, anger, and ignorance, they kind of fuel each other, creating this perfect storm of overthinking.
Yeah, they work together in a way. The mind, always seeking that stimulation, often finds negativity more engaging somehow.
Mm-hmm. It hooks us.
And as this mental noise gets louder, it essentially blocks out new experiences, leaving us feeling disconnected and, well, like life is just whizzing by.
That's the core of the problem.
So we've seen how understanding our internal drivers like desire and anger contribute to this mental noise.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at how our interaction with the external world, maybe starting with what we hear, also plays a crucial role.
Yes, because understanding these patterns is the first step. But as your notes emphasize, consciously shifting our focus back to our senses, what we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, that's the pathway.
That's how we silence the chatter.
That's how we silence that internal chatter and start experiencing life with more clarity and hopefully more joy.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these practical techniques then. The first one your research highlights is about observing emotions without reacting. Now, our usual responses when we feel something negative are usually either to kind of explode and express it,
Venting, yeah.
or to just try and bottle it up, ignore it. But apparently, neither of those is a great long-term strategy.
That's right. Both expression and suppression can actually end up reinforcing the negative emotion.
How so?
Well, when you vent your anger, for instance, it can feel momentarily satisfying almost. Stimulating,
Yeah, like a release.
Exactly. But that can create a pattern where your brain starts to associate anger with that release, making you maybe more prone to quick reactions down the line.
Okay, so it's like you're feeding the beast, in a way.
You kind of are, and suppressing it doesn't sound any better.
Right. It sounds exhausting, like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
That's a great analogy. It takes a lot of energy, and eventually it's just going to pop up somewhere else, probably in a less manageable way.
So what happens when you suppress?
Well, suppression can lead to this secondary layer of frustration, like being frustrated at the fact that you're feeling upset in the first place.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling.
It creates this internal conflict and can really throw off your emotional balance. So the source introduces mindfulness as this third option.
Okay.
Simply observing the emotion without immediately jumping to express it or trying to squash it down.
Just noticing it.
Just noticing it. And neurologically, this act of observing without that immediate reaction creates a slight pause in our typical emotional response pathway. It lets the prefrontal cortex, the brain's thinking center, engage more fully.
Right. And the Buddhist practice mentioned is to actually pause when you feel that irritation or anger arise
Take a breath.
and to mentally set it aside. And I like this little phrase they suggested. I'm irritated, I think.
Yes. That little "I think" is crucial.
Why is that?
It's about framing the emotion as a thought, not as some absolute truth about the situation. That slight detachment is key.
Okay.
By saying "I think," it creates a little bit of space between you and the feeling. You're acknowledging its presence, sure, but without being completely consumed by it.
So it shifts it from being this overwhelming reality.
To a temporary mental state. Exactly.
So this bracketing of emotions, as the source calls it, helps to prevent those runaway thoughts.
Precisely. It keeps you anchored in the present moment so you're not immediately swept away by that emotional wave.
And because you're not too overwhelmed.
You can actually see the situation more clearly and choose a more controlled, thoughtful response rather than just reacting on impulse.
Right. It's crucial to understand, then, that mindfulness isn't about denying those negative feelings or pretending they don't exist.
Not at all. It's about recognizing them, accepting that they're there, and then allowing them to pass without letting them dictate your actions or your entire mental state.
Okay, that makes sense. Just as observing our internal emotional landscape without judgment can quiet the mind, consciously engaging with our external sensory world, maybe starting with what we hear, offers another powerful anchor.
Absolutely. Another path into the present moment.
Okay, moving on to another sense then.
Yeah.
Hearing. The modern world is just, well, it's a constant barrage of noise, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Traffic, chatty coworkers, notifications.
Right. Our ears are constantly being bombarded, and apparently all this noise makes it really hard to focus and truly listen.
Which can lead to feeling pretty disconnected.
Yeah. Your research uses a great example here. Listening to music, say, before a meeting.
Right. Your brain is engaged, it's enjoying the stimulation from the music,
Okay.
but then someone starts talking about, work stuff, spreadsheets, whatever. And your brain really resists that shift. It perceives the work talk as less interesting sound.
Huh. So you try to pay attention,
But your mind just keeps drifting back or elsewhere. You end up feeling totally disconnected from the conversation that's happening right in front of you.
I can definitely relate to that. It's like your brain gets stuck in one mode and struggles to switch gears.
Exactly. So the alternative suggested is to consciously listen to the everyday sounds around you before that meeting starts. Like the hum of the air conditioning, maybe footsteps in the hall, the rustling of papers nearby. It's about training your mind to engage with the ordinary sounds, the background noise.
Training your mind.
Yeah. And what's fascinating here is the connection to this Buddhist idea of dependent arising, basically, the interconnectedness of everything.
How does that apply to listening?
Well, the source explains how the quality of your listening in one moment actually influences your ability to focus in the next.
Really?
Yeah. So if you're truly present when, say, your partner is talking at home, you'll likely find it easier to listen attentively to a colleague at work later on. Focused attention seems to strengthen those neural connections related to concentration.
It's like building a muscle, but for attention.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the source uses this lovely analogy of a constellation.
Okay.
Where every sound, whether it's your favorite song or just the hum of the office fridge, is like a star. Instead of only focusing on the bright, shiny ones, the interesting sounds, we need to appreciate the entire interconnected universe of sound.
Ah, I like that. Give equal weight to everything.
That perfectly illustrates it. By giving equal attention to all these sounds, we actually sharpen our focus and deepen our connections with others.
So listening stops feeling like a forced effort.
And becomes more natural, more integrated. And the outcome, the source suggests, is a much richer experience of the present moment. The world around you really starts to come to life in a new way.
That sounds pretty appealing. Just as consciously engaging with our hearing grounds us, being more mindful of what we visually consume offers another powerful way to quiet the mind, right?
Absolutely. Let's talk about sight.
Okay, let's move on to sight. Our eyes are definitely not spared in this age of constant information, are they?
Not even close.
I mean, just think about how much visual content we consume daily, often without even a second thought. Scrolling, watching.
Endlessly. And from a Buddhist perspective, the source argues that we're often not very mindful about what we're actually letting into our eyes, into our minds.
And your notes highlight a key twofold problem here.
Yes. First, the sheer volume of visual data we take in. And second, the nature of that data. Meaning things like endlessly scrolling through news feeds, constantly being exposed to often harrowing imagery, or maybe violent content and entertainment.
Right.
The argument is that this constant overstimulation actually dulls our perception. It clouds our minds, making it harder to engage with more subtle, maybe more calming visuals.
It's like our visual palette gets so used to these intense, over-the-top flavors that we can no longer appreciate the more delicate ones. It just feels boring.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to actively try and avoid overly stimulating images, especially those that trigger strong negative emotions like anger or confusion or fear.
Okay, be more selective.
Be more selective. Consider the analogy of a clean versus a messy room.
Right. One feels calm, the other chaotic.
Precisely. Similarly, intense visuals, even if we're not consciously aware of it, can subtly trigger negative emotions, leading to this general sense of restlessness or agitation.
Even if you don't think it's affecting you.
Even then. So the recommendation is to seek out more neutral or even calming visuals when you can. Things that help cultivate mental clarity and focus rather than jarring you.
Okay. And the source gives this lovely example of mindful walking.
Hmm.
Instead of just zoning out as you walk down the street, you actively pay attention to the visual details.
How things appear in your field of vision.
Yeah, like how a street sign appears, gets bigger as you approach it, and then fades out of view as you walk past, really observing those real-time shifts.
And the beauty of this is that it can make even the most familiar surroundings feel new and vibrant again.
Rediscovering the ordinary.
Exactly. Mindful seeing isn't about some dramatic change necessarily. It's about consciously choosing to avoid that constant, intense overstimulation.
Right.
And instead embracing simplicity. Focusing on those small details, the way sunlight hits a building, maybe the leaves rustling in the wind.
Things you normally wouldn't even notice.
Things you filter out. And the payoff is significant. This practice quiets the mind, makes us more present, it sharpens our perception.
And ultimately leads to a more engaged experience of reality.
Yes. A clearer view, you could say.
Okay, so we've covered emotions, hearing, seeing. Finally, let's consider how engaging our sense of touch can further anchor us in the present moment and quiet that mental noise.
Absolutely. Touch is incredibly grounding.
Finally, let's talk about touch. In our busy work days, we're constantly juggling interruptions, calls, meetings.
It's a recipe for scattered thoughts.
Totally. And physical tension, too. The source suggests that paying attention to the sense of touch can be a really effective way to ground ourselves and regain clarity amidst all that.
It's very immediate.
The example of sitting at a desk for hours really resonated with me. You get restless, uncomfortable.
Yep.
And your first instinct is probably to reach for your phone or find some other distraction.
Escape the discomfort.
Right. But the suggestion here is to instead focus on where your body is actually making contact with the chair.
Feel the support.
Yeah. How the seat supports you, where the backrest touches your back, maybe noticing any points of tension without judging them.
And just that simple act, bringing awareness to those physical sensations, can actually help you relax. It can even lead to naturally adjusting your posture.
Oh, interesting.
The source makes a great parallel here. It's like correcting clumsy speech once you become aware of how you're talking. Similarly, by noticing physical tension, you can start to consciously or even unconsciously release it.
Okay, and this can be applied directly to work tasks too.
Definitely. If your mind is racing while you're trying to type, for example.
Which happens a lot.
Right. Shift your focus just for a moment to the feeling of your fingertips on the keyboard, the slight resistance of the keys, the movement of your muscles. That can really sharpen your concentration and bring you right back to the task at hand. It anchors you.
And what if you're feeling completely overwhelmed?
Then even just taking a short break to engage in a simple activity while really focusing on the tactile sensations can help.
Like what kind of activity?
Anything, really. Feeling your feet on the floor as you walk to get water. Noticing the weight and texture of an object in your hands as you tidy up your desk. These everyday moments.
But it can interrupt the mental noise?
Exactly. They interrupt that frantic mental noise and help your mind reset. The source uses vacuuming as a great example, a mundane task. But if you focus on the vibrations, the movement, it can become a moment of mindful grounding.
Huh. Vacuuming is mindfulness. Never thought of that.
Why not?
So it seems like this sense of touch is a really powerful and, importantly, readily available tool to help us calm down and center ourselves, especially in the midst of a chaotic day.
It's always there. Just focusing on those small tactile details can really quiet the mind, sharpen our awareness, and help us regain control of our focus when it starts to drift.
It transforms those everyday moments that we often just rush through.
Into opportunities for genuine mindfulness.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up in this deep dive, it really seems the core message from your sources is that silencing all that mental noise, the overthinking, the chatter, really is the key.
It unlocks so much.
It unlocks a greater sense of clarity and mindfulness in our lives, and understanding how those three poisons, desire, anger, and ignorance, drive our tendency to overthink.
Knowing the roots.
We can start to address those underlying patterns and ultimately restore a greater sense of emotional balance and just presence.
And we've explored some really practical ways to do this, anchored in our senses.
Yeah, consciously observing our emotions without immediately reacting.
Paying attention to the subtle sounds around us, not just the loud ones.
Being more mindful of what we visually consume. Choosing calm over chaos.
And grounding ourselves in the simple, direct sense of touch.
And the beautiful thing about these practices, as highlighted in the material, is that they're not about some grand, sweeping changes, are they?
No, not at all. Small shifts.
They're about these small, consistent shifts in our awareness. but those small shifts can lead to a profound difference in how we experience everyday life.
Embracing the simplicity and the richness that's already there.
With a renewed sense of awareness and clarity. It sounds achievable.
It is. It just takes practice, like anything.
Okay. Well, thank you for walking us through that. Lots to think about.
My pleasure. And perhaps for you listening, consider how shifting your focus outward to your senses might subtly reshape your inner world.